Welcome to the African Renaissance podcast, and my name is Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. Today, we are privileged to be joined by one of the most important CEOs in the history of Eskom to speak about Eskom and South Africa's energy future. Ndate Jacob Maroga. Welcome, and thanks very much for creating time to speak to us.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
How have you been? What have you been doing?
I've been doing a lot of things. One of those was working with the foundation on, talking about the future of energy. What can we do with the crisis, the energy crisis? At a personal level, I'm involved in a number of energy projects, solar projects with a number of entities. So I've been busy, but mostly in the energy space.
Okay. Maybe as a way of departure or a point of departure, we sort of start with your brief history. You were the CEO of Eskom when seemingly its problems became imminent. The first widespread load shedding of 2008. But just by way of introduction to really who you are and how you came to Eskom's helm.
Okay, I'm an electrical engineer by training. So I studied at WITS, qualified electrical engineering.
Which years are these?
1985. Okay. I joined, I went to WITS around 79 under an Anglo-American bursary, which was a very good bursary. And its features was you almost like become an employee of Anglo while you study. So, we got a stipend, they paid everything. That was quite, a very intensive in the ability to be able to study without thinking of, the finances. So I started 79. I got into this bursary as one of 12 what they call cadets, and 6 in engineering, 6 in the commerce accounting space. And at the time, the idea was, the problem was the following, that Anglo had spent a lot of money trying to get black people into engineering, but they were struggling to get results. So they decided maybe we need to have an intensive program that takes students from matric, give them a pre-year where they prepare them for university, but also support them in terms of the areas of weakness. For instance, you spent a pre-university year, doing mathematics, doing chemistry, but to strengthen us to go into university. But part of that was also to expose us to industry, because I decided to do electrical engineering, but I had not met an electrical engineer before.
In your life, yeah.
Okay? So what they did was to take us through their industries, to the mines, to meet various engineering fraternities, so that by the time you go to university in the first year, you've got some context. That's how I got into electrical engineering. So we did that. Interesting things I may talk about. But qualified 1985, went into a program of junior engineers in an Anglo mine in Carltonville, Western Deep Levels. Spent 2 years there. Then I decided to join AECI. Spent, I think, 2 to 3 years. Joined the company that was doing the Mosques project. Spent a few years there. And then joined Sasol. I think Sasol, that's where I stayed. I think I stayed there about 5 years. Then from there, I went to Eskom. I started in Eskom in what is called the distribution technology. In 1995, at the time, the biggest focus for Eskom and the biggest capital was electrification. The idea was to electrify about 300,000 homes per annum as part of the electrification drive of Eskom. So I joined what is called distribution technology, designing systems for electrification, the meters, the prepaid meters, the infrastructure to bring electricity into homes in rural areas, which was is a different challenge from doing that in an urban area. So I did that started in 1995, and then went to a division called transmission. Now, transmission, as opposed to distribution, is almost the highway of electricity. Distribution is, the regional roads into the homes of people. Transmission is almost the highway, the big power lines, taking power from the power stations and transmitting to all over the country, to the Cape, and then from there they get distributed. That's how I then got into transmission. And from transmission, I got promoted in 2007 to become the Chief Executive Officer of Eskom. From there until 2009. That's my history. Electrical engineer, worked in the mines, worked in the petrochemical, and then ended up at Eskom, spent 15 years at Eskom. And I think a big part of my career in terms of electrical engineering and senior executives was at Eskom.
I had this in a different order, but I think let us immediately get to how it came to be that you separated with Eskom. What were the circumstances of your removal, as it were, as CEO?
Look, I think everybody has got his own interpretation when things do go wrong. So I joined 2007. I mean, I appointed 2007 as a chief executive.
Which month?
May 2007. And the chairman then was Vali Musa. Okay. The president of the country was Thabo Mbeki. As you know, I think 2007, the big conference in Polokwane happened. And then the president changed in 2008. The board changed 2008, thereabouts. So the politics of state-owned enterprises became very complex. My board, which was then chaired by Bobby Godsoe, and I got into differences. And the bigger difference was whether I resigned or not resigned. And in the end, there was an unholy separation. And that's how I left Eskom.
Why unholy?
Unholy that it was not a managed separation. I hadn't completed my tenure, my first tenure as the CEO, and then both myself and Bobby Godsoe then left Eskom without finishing our tenure.
Are you able to take us into confidence? What were the points of differences that resulted into you and Bobby not seeing eye to eye?
Well, I think, in my view, first let me just get into the context of how I saw Eskom. When I started my CEO tenure, it was at the height where two things were happening. We're getting into a period where capacity, the power generation capacity of Eskom, was beginning to be diminished in comparison to the demand. In 2007, that's when we firstly got what is called national load shedding. That's the first context.
In December?
Yes, around towards the end of the year. I don't remember the dates, but that's when we begin to have challenges of power supply shortages. Okay, that's the first key element. The other key element was Eskom was beginning to go through a big build-out of new generation. Now, prior to that, I think these things are, intertwined, so I must give you the context. See, for most time, since 1994, and even prior to 1994, Eskom in South Africa had excess capacity. The electricity was cheap, there was excess capacity. electricity supply was reliable. But going towards 2007, everybody began to know that if you don't build new capacity, we're going to run into trouble. But then there was a debate. Should the new capacity be built by Eskom or should be built by private players? Okay?
A debate internally or generally?
It was both internally and externally. It was a policy debate. And I think you may remember there was a big policy document called the 1998 Energy White Paper. The Energy White Paper articulated a vision or a future of the electricity supply industry in South Africa. And part of that was to say, when it comes to the generation of electricity, not only Eskom will participate. In fact, the intention was that when it comes to new generation, it will be an opportunity to bring new players, to bring private players, to bring competition. And the idea of that was that you don't want to have only one monopoly. You also want to bring new capital through the private players. So that was the context of that policy. But the biggest stumbling block to that was that South Africa's electricity pricing was very low. Now, when electricity prices are low, it encourages consumers to consume more, but it doesn't encourage investors because investors want a higher price to get higher returns. So the uptake of new private players was very, very low. The appetite was very low. So there was this debate. So what do we do? Should we let Eskom do it, or should we do something to still encourage private players to come in? So it took too long for that debate to be closed. And then 2007 was coming close, and we knew that if we hit 2007 and we don't have additional capacity, we're going to run out of trouble. And we did. Now, so the two elements that I was debating with people like Bobby Gossel internally was, what is then the role of Eskom, not only in terms of generation, but you need to understand the role of Eskom bigger than just electricity. And using the context of the original mandate of Eskom was not only to provide electricity, but it was an industrial platform. Provide electricity, but at a particular price, and provide it in such a way that it's available anywhere so that anybody who wants to go into industry can get access to electricity. And that was my context to say we need to put the role of Eskom in the context of what the new South Africa demands, requires from a socio-economic point of view, given the new context. So I could see that, for him and for a number of people, both in industry and in the board, was more to move Eskom quickly or electricity quickly to more into private hands. So that's where I think the beginning of our disagreement, and in the end it culminated in this discussion about whether I resigned or not resigned. But those are the detail. The big picture is the role of Eskom in relation to the needs of the new South Africa, and in the context of what Eskom can play and electricity can play in developing, the new industries for the new South Africa.
Maybe then this is an opportune time to travel back to the establishment of this company. And this idea of it being at the center of an industrial strategy, at the hands of the previous regime. Perhaps for the benefit of the conversation of how it falls apart, or how it went into a crisis, as it were. Are you able to maybe give us that brief history of Eskom's significance and catalytic role in driving industrialization during the previous regime?
Interestingly, as I began my tenure as a chief executive, and in the period where, the power system began to wobble. So one of the things I begin to do is, or ask myself, is this is Eskom was established in 1923, around 2007, it was in getting closer to 8 years in existence. So the question I ask myself is, the people before me, how did they manage this entity? What are they? Did they have this kind of challenges that we're having? How did they solve them? Now that started a journey for me to study the history of Eskom. And when you study the history of Eskom, you end up studying the history of the industrialization of South Africa. And when you study that, you study the history of the Union of South Africa. Then it goes back. So in doing that, and this is now my understanding of how this came about. So you would know the history of South Africa, that in 1910, South Africa formed a Union of South Africa, which is a union between the two warring white communities, the English and the African.
Yes.
Prior to 1910, there was Second Anglo-Boer War, which ended it around 1903. 1910 is the Union of South Africa, which is the idea that the English and the African must unite and be in a bigger South Africa, because prior to that, South Africa was made out of British colonies and Boer republics. And 1910 was the amalgamation of that. Out of 1910, personalities like Jan Smuts emerged as the ruling elite of that era. And the question is, how do we industrialize South Africa? How do we bring South Africa into the modern world, the modern industrialized world? And Jan Smuts then orchestrate this strategy of developing South Africa. And if you read and you study the history of Jan Smuts, a very well-read leader across multiple fields. So what Jan Smuts asked this question about, how do we industrialize South Africa? Then he enlists a number of Afrikaner, scholars, intellectuals. And one of those, the first one of those, is a guy called Dr. Hendrik van der Bijl. Dr. Hendrik van der Bijl, a scientist, an electrical engineer who was working abroad with PhDs in a number of fields. Jan Smuts called him back to South Africa and said, can you develop an industrial strategy for South Africa? Then Hendrik van der Bijl writes a paper, and in that paper he says we need to have an organized national electricity system. We need to organize a steel industry. We need to organize a transportation industry. We also need to organize a funding strategy for state-owned enterprises and related entities. Then Jan Smuts given the task, okay, I'm giving you the first task to start the energy system. So in 1923, Hendrik van der Bijl then becomes the first chairman of Eskom. And under the empowerment of what is called the Electricity Act of 1922. And it was a simple act that says the Eskom should provide abundant electricity wherever is required across the country, but not for profit or loss. It was almost a non-profit for electricity. Now, then the next task for Hendrik van der Bijl was steel. Then he went to start ISCO. And then the next task was the IDC. He went to start the IDC, and he started many others. He also began to empower a group of Afrikaner scholars, scientists around them. And I can name, maybe 3 or 4 of them. So Hendrik van der Bijl is the first one. Then you've got people like Hendrik van Eck, who started Eskom, but he went to start IDC. Then you've got a person like Etienne Rousseau, who started SASO. And you've got a guy like Frans du Toit, who also worked at IDC, but helped in the formation of ISCO. Now, I call those the Jan Smuts cadres, because around that small group, they begin to orchestrate what in 1994 would call the state-owned enterprises, Sasol, Eskom, Transnet, ISCO, and related entities. But all of those were state-owned enterprises meant for the industrialization of South Africa. The industrialization also happened around mining. The mines were privately owned and, of course, state-owned enterprises owned by government. But part of the state-owned enterprises as well was the employment and empowerment of Afrikaners and white people in general. Because out of the state-owned enterprises emerged what I call the Afrikaner industrial class. You must understand, before 1910, after the war or before the war of the Anglo-Boer War, Afrikaners were mainly farmers because they were not in the industries. But come this side of 1910 up to 1950, they emerge as industrialists, and it comes out of state-owned enterprises, which part is to industrialize, but the other part is to actually bring the African society to the industrial level. And they do so well in some of these areas. I mean, Sasol was first in class, and world class in terms of converting coal into liquid fuels. They took a German technology and took it mainstream. Eskom, coal, took low-grade coal and built electricity system with it. And in the way they did it was also world class. Very few countries were able to take low-grade coal and make electricity out of it. That in many fields, this state-owned enterprises actually became world-class, and it brought the Afrikaner into the industrial ecosystem. So that's how then Eskom evolved, and many issues. And in 1985, I think mid-80s, Eskom goes into the first crisis. And what was the first crisis? The first crisis is that in the 60s, 70s, during the height of apartheid, the economy was booming at the back of the gold boom. Mm-hmm. Okay? Then Eskom decided to build a lot of capacity following this boom. But come early 70s, early 80s, because of sanctions, the economy tanks. But Eskom is committed to a lot of generation capacity. So a lot of capacity, low economic activity, low consumption of electricity, then its revenue base got squeezed. Then it goes into a financial crisis. 1983, they have a commission to look at the problems of Eskom. Then there is a huge intervention in the how Eskom operates. And the most important part is they move Eskom from where it used to be, where it operates not for profit, to say you must look like any corporate now. Become a self-standing corporate, run on corporate lines. That's the first crisis, and that was the first change in 1983 to 1987. So from there on, and there isn't any new build because they've got excess capacity. Then they bring another person from the from private sector, a guy called John Murray, to come and turn around Eskom, and that's then the new phase of Eskom from 1987 up to 1994. Now, when 1994 comes, it comes when Eskom has got excess capacity. Most of the issues of the 80s have been, changed. So the next question is, what is then the new role, the new structure of Eskom? So in 1994, in fact, in the early 90s, as the talks were happening in Kempton Park, the new management of Eskom asked themselves the question, what should be the role of Eskom in this emerging political situation? So one of the issues was electrification. So Eskom began to do electrification on its own before even government helps with electrification. So the issue of universal access began to be focused on, and as 1994 hits, Eskom is focusing on electrification of black household, At that time, about 30% of households were electrified. Then Eskom says we want to take that to 90%. So we hit 1994. Eskom is still, flying its credit rating better than government. And then we get into 1994. Then 1998 comes this issue about what should the structure of electricity be in South Africa. During that time, the biggest issues, the biggest frameworks for electricity was what was happening in the UK. Privatization, breaking up monopolies, and also bringing in private players into electricity. That's when the 1998 policy was adopted, and it was adopted along the lines of the UK electricity model. But since 1998, there's not been any major development around that front because of the situation that South Africa found itself. One of the issues was then the discussion I've just said, that what should Eskom do in relation to generation in comparison with the private sector. That issue was not resolved until 2007 when the government saw that we are running close to the edge. That's when the government said, look, we must allow Eskom to start building. That's when the new build of Eskom started happening.
In 2007, towards the end of the year, when the first whole-scale load shedding happens, you are the CEO.
Right.
What caused it?
It comes from the delay in the building of new power stations, because government delayed in making the decision to allow Eskom to build. We came to a point where the supply and demand periodically begin to have a mismatch. That was the biggest issue. We didn't have enough generation capacity in circumstances where the economy has been growing. When you look at the economy between maybe early 2000s to 2000, the economy was growing, but the capacity was not following that growth. So that was the first load shedding was caused by this mismatch. So then government says to Eskom, the private sector program that we have, it seems not to be coming along. So we now nominate you as the entity to prepare yourself to build
Additional capacity.
So you'll see that around 2007, when Medupi and Kusile get approved, and Eskom is given this permission to do the big build, then a lot of preparation, a lot of activity to procure, to bring service providers to do the new power stations. Now, in hindsight, when you look at the challenges that then we got as Eskom, in hindsight, one of the issues was the fact that since late 70s up to then, we had not been building any power stations. So the skills to build power stations have moved out of the organization. So when we start building, we still think we can do it the way it was done in the early 70s and early 80s. That's when we begin to realize that internally it's a big challenge to actually bring those skills. That's the first issue. The second issue was that the financial framework to prepare yourself for a big build, which was used during the big build of the 70s and 80s, has been scrapped. So what used to happen is that Eskom, in preparation for new capacity, in the tariff, it will put a portion for what is called capital fund. So it will operational, funds, but capital fund to put a kitty so that when we build a new power station, we can draw from that. So in the 1987, that was scrapped. So the second issue was the financial issue. How do we fund the new capital? Ordinarily, if you are if you are owned by a shareholder, the shareholder will take money out of his pocket for new capacity. But with Eskom, it was forced to actually build new capacity based on the tariffs. That's then when you look at from 2007, 2008, prices of electricity begin to go up to compensate for the new capital that we need to build, because we didn't put a kitty up front, and this shareholder, which is government, didn't say this is money that you need to use to build a new capital. So that so it's skills to do the build, it's money to do the build. Then beyond 2009, after I've left, I think it's issue that me and you can talk about. I mean, we are looking from them from outside. I mean, the political environment that brought in, I think, things like state capture, could be part of that. But in hindsight, I mean, today, I think this week, the Eskom leadership is just announcing that the last unit of Kusile has been synchronized, meaning is now fully operational.
Yes.
And it has taken close to 15 years for those power stations to come in. And there's been many issues around why did it take so long and why did it take so much? And, the general reason are, it was during state capture, things like corruption. But the question that I think that I begin to emerge in hindsight, to say some of the, contractors that and service providers that have been brought to build Medupi and Kusile are some of the best in the world. I mean, the Hitachi's, the Alstoms, the ABBs, and in terms of the civils in South Africa, some of the best consortia.
Yes.
The question is, if they've done these things before in other countries and circumstances, what are the factors that led to having the situation where the Eskom power stations took so long and took so much? And those things, I think, are still up in the air in terms of...
But I do want your own speculation,
right,
and analysis of that. But there is an unfinished business about how precisely it comes to be that the whole country could have a load shedding. I mean, even with the highest forms of load shedding that we saw in 2003, I think they were putting it at 290 days of load shedding in that year alone.
2023 or 2003?
2023.
Okay.
But how does it come with this history you're describing? This is what boggles my mind. That there could be a total blackout instantly across South Africa. Is that, from an engineering point of view, something even remotely possible? That, maybe I should put it differently. Where were you when the load shedding happened, and did you know, and was it planned?
Yeah, look. Let me tell you the history of South Africa. I think load shedding in South Africa. People talk about 2007. There've been load shedding incidents in the past. They were short.
Yes,
they were short, sporadic, but then they were resolved. It was never prolonged. But the first incident of load shedding in South Africa was around early 2003, 2004, but it was regional. It was in the Cape. So what had happened then, so the Cape is supplied by Quebec, and it also supplied by transmission line coming from, the north of the country, the east of the country, to the south into the Cape. So if Quebec is down, or both Quebec units are down, you may have a shortage if one of the lines also goes down. So we had a combination where 2 Quebecs units were down and one of the lines down. And we actually had a day's blackout of the Cape. Okay. It was not national news because it was regional. But for people in the Cape, it was big news.
Yes.
So we did, and then to be able to manage that, and I was intimately involved with it, to manage that, to turn it around, we spent months. Do we manage load shedding in the Cape to manage supply and demand? That was 2003, 2004. Then 2007, it becomes national. Now, load shedding is a managed way of managing the grid so that it doesn't collapse.
But was the 2007 widespread nationwide?
Yeah, it was nationwide, but yeah.
Was it a planned load shedding?
Yes.
So you said as a company and planned that on this specific day, for the following hours, we are going to cut the whole country off from power.
Yes. So there's a unit in Germiston called the system operator. They look at supply and demand 24 hours. Yes. They can anticipate what the demand is, and they know what supply they have. But if for some reason one power station strips and they see that there's going to be a surplus, now to manage that the grid doesn't collapse in its totality, they shave the demand, and you shave that through load shedding. There are many other things that you can do before you do load shedding. For instance, there are certain customers that you've got contracts with, like the smelters, where you could give them notice. Please shut off between this time and this time so that we can save the rest of the country. You do that. Now, if that is exhausted, you'll go, and until you now have, blocked switch off. That's what is load shedding, rotate load shedding. So we have never had an uncontrolled blackout. An uncontrolled blackout is when the whole country goes dark and you don't know when it's going to come back again. And that's actually quite dangerous.
But as I understand, that was the 2007
No,
instance.
2007.
So 2007, you knew. If you did, why didn't you give notice? Because I remember President Mbeki in the State of the Nation of February 2008, which was a month after, had to apologize to the country.
Yeah.
Because there had not been a warning and there had not been a sense of this is how much the lights will go off. This is how long the lights will go off. And therefore, everybody prepare yourself. And these are the reasons.
Yeah.
It was a post-mortem sort of reaction.
Yeah. I think there was just probably one incident in, I think around January 2008. It was still load shedding. It was not a blackout. It was still load shedding, but we had to do an extensive load shedding that particular day because the shortage was quite extreme. So what we then did, it was a proactive notice to mines to say, our system is wobbly. So please don't send people underground or take people underground in case of an emergency. So that was the only time we came to what you'd call blackout. But all other...
January 2008.
January 2008, yeah.
But that's my point.
Yeah.
The first nationwide.
Yeah.
Nationwide. Maybe I have mixed my dates between the 2007 December and January 2008. This is the instance for which the head of the state at the time had to apologize because there was no warning.
Yes, sure.
What had happened?
No.
You seem to say it was planned. If it was planned, it seems to me that there would have been a proper warning to businesses, to hospitals, to, a whole, to the citizenry as a whole, that on such and such a time we are shedding the loads. Prepare yourselves because this is what we're going to do, and this is the scale of it.
Yeah.
And yet it didn't occur like that.
No, it did. So we were doing load shedding because periodically we'll have these periods where we've got demand that exceeds supply,
Yeah.
then we will warn people that we're doing load shedding. But this particular day, the extent of the shortage was such that we were worried if we do not manage to arrest it, it could cause a collapse. Now, one of the things that if a collapse happened and people are underground where they depend on ventilators
Yes.
and, you could endanger lives. So that the warning came, but it was short notice warning to say the shortage is such that it's very close to borderline. But as a preventative measure, please take people out of dangerous places that if electricity goes down uncontrollably, it may endanger lives. That was really the January incident in 2008, but not a blackout.
Some of the people speculate. I'll try to belabor this point, not for too long, but there was speculation, or there's since been speculation that there's this report which the state is sitting on that demonstrates that it was actually a sabotage, that there's been an actual orchestrated sabotage of Eskom, partly to enable this private interest, firstly profiling itself initially as renewables, the renewables revolution. But on the other side, it was a deliberate, basically to start discrediting, a long process of discrediting, delegitimizing the post-democratic state. But that this sabotage, the way it occurs, and you are the engineer, I'm not. But we are told that this management system you're speaking about, which is able to tell if there is enough coal in the power stations, that stockpiles of coal are not supposed to be below a certain level. But there's a system that is able to tell you when stockpiles of those of coal are below, and then it sends warnings that pile up, bring in. That there was a deliberate ignoring of that, so that systems could fall apart, which then caused Eskom, to go into load shedding. But that this was actually deliberate. I wonder if you have something to say or some reaction. You must have heard this before. And it is said again, in addition to that it was not because of all these things you are describing. It was actually a sabotage, and the SIU sits on such a report, which was commissioned by the directors, seemingly. But that there was an investigation, and an investigation proved that was not, a normal systems failure. It was a deliberate sabotage. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, you see, from an engineering perspective, it's always difficult to come to.
They say you were sabotage. You were the CEO.
Yes.
Would it surprise you that engineers could collide with certain private actors, maybe in an interest to fast track a situation where Eskom concedes maybe to some of the debates of bringing in private and independent power producers?
As I'm saying, from an engineering perspective, it's always difficult to come to a point of sabotage, because when things are explained, they will come in technical terms. And it's only when you enlist people with more forensic capabilities that can unpack beyond the technical. For instance, the issues of coal that in 2008, 2007 were big issues, where situations arose where certain power stations ran out of coal, or alternatively, the coal that was available was not usable because it was wet and muddy. So you can't actually burn it properly. Now, to an extent that there were people who knew this was coming and didn't do what they needed to do, from the engineering perspective, the technical answer is we ran out of coal because the logistic of coal failed. But when you go beyond that and do forensic to say, is there anything beyond? That is then beyond the competence of engineers to.
But what would such a sabotage,
Yeah.
if indeed these reports are true,
Yeah.
in your mind,
Yes.
in retrospect,
Right.
let us say that sabotage occurred. When you think back,
Yeah.
what interest would have served?
Okay. I mean, let me talk to two things, and we talk about renewables as one issue. The energy system and the electricity system are very critical to the success of a country. And therefore, if you have bad intentions and you have a very organized plan, the energy system could be an easy target to say, if I want to compromise the success of the country, I can actually orchestrate a failure of the power system. Because if you don't have a functioning power system, you don't have a functioning economy. If you don't have a functioning economy, there can be discontentment around the economy that compromises the new political situation. So that is quite possible. And given the fact that in these highly technical areas, there may have been individuals who have loyalties somewhere else, but they are in the middle of the critical system to run a power system. It is quite plausible and possible. And even today, now I'm coming to the issue of renewables, because then when we dealt with Midupikusile and the load shedding, then the issue was not much about renewables. It was, everybody was, was talking about the coal system. And of course, in hindsight, there are people who are asking the question in terms of the length it took Midupi and Kusile to be built, the cost it took, in circumstances that the companies that were doing the bulk part of this are international companies, have experience. The question is, why didn't they bring this experience to bear so that we get the benefit of
I want to come back to that, and because I do think it's important to break it down for us. What do you think the possibilities attained for those delays?
Sure.
But the coal question, in 2008, part of what is speculated or what is said to have also been responsible at the time, it's these transportation networks where apartheid or the previous regime had built power stations closer to coal mines and had these conveyor belts that did the transportation of coal. But these things were then damaged to necessitate transportation of coal through trucks and all of that, which is an additional cost, so to speak. And that this had already started to be, so that when Eskom now depends on a third-party contractor to get coal, part of what happens is that the quality of that coal, you are not able to guard it from point A to point B, but in the process, then these muddy, wet coal rocks, sometimes they even painted actual rocks just black to break the machines. Is this a possibility?
Okay, it is a possibility, but let me give you what comes to you as an executive around that problem, because there's a fairly logical explanation to some of them. Now, whether behind the logic there's hidden motives who can never go beyond that wall. For instance, let me just give you an example of the coal question in Eskom. As you correctly say, most of the power stations at Eskom are built almost on top of the coal deposit. So the idea is that you mine the coal, ship it with a conveyor belt into the power station. But as you mine the coal, there's going to be requirement for you to expand the mining area, so to continuously satisfy the demand of the power stations. So what happens in some cases, this investment in the development of the mine, stops or slows down for various reasons. So what actually happens is this local mine no longer is able to supply the full requirement of these power stations. So the mine operated and come to Eskom and said, look, I need so many billions to expand for new area. And Eskom said, no, I can't give you that. Then the mine says, look, therefore, I'm not able to continuously supply you with your full requirement. So what happened then? Then Eskom will say, I will then, whatever the shortfall that I'm not getting from the mine, I will actually have to get through trucking. So now it's a commercial logic of how you then go into trucking, right? Now, whether there is nefarious reasons behind that, you cannot go as from a technical perspective, because somebody will give you a logical, technical reason, commercial reason, and there are other reasons also where, for economic reason, the mine, because normally the mines are two product mines. They produce quality coal for, high quality coal for export, and there's Eskom quality coal. Eskom quality coal is normally low grade, and the power stations are designed that way. And the mine economics also designed that part of the coal, which is high grade for export, you do for export. The Eskom coal goes to Eskom. So what happens sometime, and it has happened in various areas, where the volumes and the prices for export goes up, and the miners neglect what is for Eskom. And in some cases, even the Eskom quality coal become in demand from an export perspective, and some of the miners begin to neglect what is for Eskom. Then you have a shortfall for Eskom, then Eskom has to augment with transportation. Now, those are the technical reasons that will come in front of you. Now, behind that wall of technical logic, if people are then doing nefarious things from a technical perspective, it's very difficult. Now, it requires that kind of, more in-depth look. Are these reasons valid? But at the time when it was there, that wasn't a dominant focus. The commercial and the technical reasons were dominant. But in hindsight, when you now look at the whole array of things, of things collapsing, coal being sabotaged, the legitimate question is it all really logical and technical, or is there a hand behind it? And is there a hand behind it because the power system is very critical to the democracy? And if people want to compromise the democracy, is it possible that they've done things, nefarious things, to compromise the power system? Those are fair and valid questions that I think also require examination.
Okay. Big load shedding happens 2008 January. And then you don't experience anything of that magnitude. For what? For almost a decade.
Yeah.
What changed? Because that was even before the two new power stations, Medupi and Kusile, are even before the soil is turned, turning of the soil when something new is going to be built. How do we explain that sustenance, that ending of load? What fixed the problem?
Yeah. So there are two important things in terms of the availability of capacity in generation power stations. Number one is obviously, do you have enough overall?
Mhm.
That is your margin is it thin or is it? That's the first thing. The second thing is the performance of those power stations. You can have a good margin but bad performance. So one of the things that was done from 2007, 2009 is to improve the performance of the power stations to close the margin. Number one. Number two, demand side, looking at how we can reduce demand, especially during peak. I don't know whether you remember, there were a lot of issues about lighting, efficient lighting. Eskom actually went out to give efficient lighting so that we can reduce the demand. Talking to customers, some of the customers that can shift load. You actually get into a contract with the customer to say, if you are able to shift load when I'm in trouble, I will then pay you. Those things helped in managing the demand before we started having the big Mbuyiseni Ndlozi coming on stream. So in ending load shedding, those were combinations of things which were done until we started having load shedding again. I mean, from 2009 when we stopped it, I think it came back to, I think around 2014, 15, it was stopped again. Then the biggest one, I mean, which is, the biggest bout of load shedding in history is from around 2021 to 2023.
Yeah. Your earlier speculations then, we commissioned two fairly large power stations. What took them long? You were beginning to unpack in your own speculation what could have been the causes of these delays, construction delays, sometimes seemingly wrong buildings or wrong plans or right plans, wrong constructions. What attained with regards to those delays?
Yeah, again, I'm going to separate what is engineering logic and what could be investigated beyond the engineering. From the engineering and operations perspective, as I've indicated, one of the issues that emerged was that when we started Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, which were big mega projects, Eskom had not done that for about maybe 20, 30 years. So the skill inside Eskom was not at that level that it was when we were doing the big. So from managing those things it becomes an issue. The next issues at the time we're going out to do Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, a contracting method called turnkey was very difficult to attain. And a turnkey is when you as a customer give the responsibility for the entire project to the contractor. You must deliver in time, must integrate. Now, contractors at the time have bent their fingers because it was a huge time of building. When they did turnkey, when they took all the risk, they had to pay a lot of penalties. So they either charge you an arm and a leg to do a turnkey, or they say, no, you integrate yourself. And Eskom chose to integrate themselves, integrate this mega project themselves. When I'm saying integrating, meaning you've got multiple projects that for time and cost, Eskom then manages so that within time, within budget and within time. A turnkey, you leave that. It's like when you build a house and say, I'll manage how the timing of the house and the budget of the house myself as an owner. Or I say, I'm giving you a fixed amount of money. You do it within that. And if you don't do it, I'm going to charge you penalties. That's the difference. So Eskom decided to integrate. Now that bring the risk to Eskom.
Back to Eskom.
Back to
Yes.
Eskom. Then the third element, which is a very, a lot of talk about it, is, what has come out, corruption. How much did corruption, contribute to that? But it's also, speculation in terms of how much it is. But the fact that it was, I think, is subject to public, it's in the public domain, SIU, all right. But in hindsight, and I think the issue of whether there's been a nefarious agenda to compromise the build is something that is beginning to be out in the open, subject to investigation, closer to say, how did it happen that these entities that have done similar things all over the world, but in South Africa, these things just escalated in terms of time and cost? I think it's a legitimate question and an open question that must be investigated.
Okay. I want to come to the present now.
Yeah.
How did Eskom recover from this moment that we situate between 2001 and 2021 and 2023, which was the worst moment, despite the fact of some of the new generation capacity kicking in? You solved the load shedding problem without the two big power stations, and we even, arrived at I think half of Medupi coming in. The World Cup went uninterruptedly, but things got bad again. How did we get to that crisis, and how did Eskom, in this instance, fix it?
Okay. Now, technical, how did we get to the crisis
of 2021 to 2023?
Yeah.
Massive load shedding.
Yeah.
Such that the president had to create a whole ministry of electricity.
Yeah. So there's a measure in Eskom, in the performance of generation, I think is now well known, energy availability factor.
Yes.
All right. Meaning how much are the power station available for producing electricity against the total time that they have. Okay. So when we had the biggest load shedding, we're hovering below 50%.
Yes.
Okay. And when you have less load shedding is when you closer to 70%. Okay. So in 2021, we went below 50%. And it was worsening, not improving. And that's why we had the biggest load.
Yeah, but we kind of get that.
Yeah. Now the question is
what
why?
Cost it?
What cost it? Now this is my speculation. This is my opinion. When the issue of the just energy transition became more prominent, and it coincided with the 2021 period, when the COP26, which happened in Glasgow, where South Africa was convinced, or it convinced itself, or some people convinced them that you can move quickly from coal to renewables because coal is dirty, it's old, renewables are cheaper and cleaner. Let's move to renewables. What I think happened is that there was a neglect of the coal power stations. And the management and the leadership that went in, were dominant in around 2021, believed that. And
they believed in neglecting the coal generation technologies.
Exactly. So when you neglect it and you don't maintain it, and also the people associated with managing the coal no longer feel they have a future, that whole organization begin to be marginalized, and the performance went down, and load shedding escalated. And the more they thought by adding more renewables, you reduce load shedding, technically you can't do that. There's certain attributes of coal power stations, which you call dispatchable capacity, meaning you can control their output. solar and wind, you can't control the output. It's controlled by the weather. So you can't replace coal with solar and wind. You add on top of it, because solar and wind requires backup. So technically, some of the people who were inside there were not fully appreciating that, believing that if we just add more renewables, we don't need to fix the coal. The new leadership, starting with the Minister of Electricity, the board that he appointed, and the new CEO, got that. That for us to remove load shedding, we have to fix and manage the coal properly, which they focus. Now, I mean, today I've seen announcing that they are now averaging 70% of energy availability factor. And that's the only thing that removes load shedding. If you're above 70, you deal with the demand and you reduce load shedding, irrespective of how much renewables you have. Now, we can come back to the speculation of, was it deliberate to make sure that the coal power stations don't perform, so that the narrative that these are old things, let's move away and move to renewables, it becomes a powerful narrative. That's something that must be investigated.
You were beginning to link, it seems to me, or the reason of linking COP 17 that takes place at Glasgow, and a certain fund is made available and it sits in the presidency, that South Africa must have the so-called just energy transition. That seems to me like deliberate. It doesn't seem like speculation. You are deliberately making a decision that I no longer want my coal power stations. I even have money. I'm going to move to renewables. On the one hand. But couldn't the sabotage also service the fast tracking? I mean, if I'm ANC, or if I'm this dominant political formation, but it's difficult to collapse, I can fast track its collapse by introducing a crisis of the lights, the hopelessness or the despondency of the average citizen experiencing that. It doesn't sound like a confusion engineers would have, that the sun in winter it's less, so you're not going to get more of it even if you wish. The wind is subjected to seasons as well. Doesn't sound like a complicated engineering question that you would be confused by when you make that shift, or when you make a determination as to at which point would that shift arrive, where you no longer depend so much on energy generated from coal on the one hand, but on the other, you have made an investment. You've just spent billions. It's an actual investment that depends on people that are employed. There are all sorts of risks. It doesn't sound to me like the leadership would just suddenly forget the consequences that would come out of such a decision. It's cataclysmic. Why is sabotage not an option? Why is it in your imagination something that is a speculation that still requires some investigation?
Yeah. Again, I mean, I always want to make sure that I don't cross the cycle of my profession in terms of making categoric statements.
Don't you have a professional duty to the success of South Africa?
Yeah. No. Look, let me be quite clear. I mean, I've been very vocal around the claim that you could resolve the reliability of coal power stations by adding renewables. Technically, you can't. And I've been, it's been clear. Now, it is very clear that those who wants to bring renewables faster are emphasizing that, and I've been very, very vocal, that is, engineering fiction, that you could, when your power stations, coal power stations are not performing, you can resolve that by bringing only renewables. And when you look at also examples internationally, even countries that have done, have gone ahead with renewables to a big extent, Germany, UK, are now understanding that they cannot take away the baseload stations. In fact, they now have to duplicate those systems, because it's almost like you run a solar and wind system, and you have this one, if the sun is shining, this one just wait. But it's ready to come in when the sun goes down or the wind stops. But therefore, you have to have two systems. And having two systems becomes expensive. And the cost of electricity doesn't go down, it goes up. Now, the question now is it what South Africa wants? Right? Now, I don't want to say it's sabotage or not sabotage, but it was deliberate to remove the rationale for coal, which has been a big mistake. Yeah.
As things stand, if we are to map the future, first things first.
Yeah.
What is South Africa's energy policy, and where does it lie? Does it lie with the electricity department or minister, the minister of minerals and Kwetemantashe, or does it lie with the presidency? Because there's also some team in the presidency concerned with energy, where this funding, for instance, lies.
Yes.
At the moment, what is your reading of the situation? And if you could speculate before you say what you think should be the policy on energy. At the moment, does South Africa does it have an energy policy, and where does it lie? Who's the principal?
It's actually still very confusing, because the formation of the energy action team in the presidency seems to have removed some of the policy ministries from the center, and the presidency is leading. And in there also there was, in my view, a risk of policy capture, because some of the people who wants to capture the energy policy could bypass ministers and get into these task teams which are in the presidency. And some of the task teams are coming from seconded people from industry who are not, they are unelected, So there has been that confusion. What I'm seeing is that the current Minister of Energy and Electricity seems to be taking it back to say he is the center of energy and electricity policy, which, electricity is just part of energy. So there seems to be much more integrated way, because some of the entities also in the energy space, NESA, the NTCSA, the new transmission board, and Eskom now report to a single minister. They used to report to public enterprise, but now they're reporting to a single ministry. So there's a sense that things have been integrated. But what the energy policy should be, I think, is still an open question. And that could lead to my own issues where I've started, where I said, before you talk about the energy policy, you need to be clear about the industrial vision that we have. And examples are the Chinas. Now, in China, you don't see a whole issue about competitive electricity market. The idea, in my understanding of China, China's vision is that we want to be an industrial superpower. Therefore, if we want to do that, we have to select which sectors we're going to play. And they've selected those sectors, the clean tech sector, electric vehicles, that, we're going to be dominant in that. And they then say, what is the industry organization, how we organize our industries to do that? And part of it is to say, most of those industries are energy intensive. So for us to succeed, we're going to have to make energy abundant and energy cheap. And they then decided that for them, coal, it is that element of cheap and abundant energy. So they said to the world, when you talk about climate change, they said to the world, no, we're going to increase our coal capacity because that is our strategy to industrialize. But part of their industrialization is to build solar and wind and export it to the world. Now they control almost 80 to 90% of solar, 80 to 90% of batteries, maybe 70% of electric vehicles, because they've decided that they will use coal to go into those industries to produce those products because they're energy intensive. So there is a clear logic between their energy policy and their industrial vision. Now, for South Africa, I think we need to go there. You can't talk about energy policy until you say, where is our industry going? Because if cheap energy and abundant energy is your strategy, you're going to have to say, what is the source of that? And the source of that can be solar and wind. Because unfortunately, you can't industrialize based on solar and wind. No one has done that.
But industrialization as a point of departure is impossible without electricity.
Absolutely.
Regardless of what it is. And industrial technologies, the future at least in the whole world, we have fully entered the fourth industrial revolution. And fourth industrial revolution technologies demand a lot of energy. So you don't have energy sustainability. You are just going to get out. You're going to be left behind the rest of the world. What should South Africa's energy policy be if you are the minister tomorrow? Maybe Ramokgopa he wins the ANC conference, I don't know, or he's the deputy president. They come and they say, okay, you are the new minister of electricity. First things first, design an energy policy on the basis that South Africa wants to, I hear them all the time saying this, local beneficiation of the minerals that we have, chrome and all of them. What would your immediate or key elements of your industrial policy, of your energy policy be?
In fact, you're right. Firstly, industry. Yeah. What is the industrial policy? What is the energy policy? The examples are there in the world, and I can use 3 examples to see what not to do and what to do. Okay. Europe, for instance, had decided a few years ago it is going to be the leader in decarbonization of their energy systems, and also what is called reforms in the power markets. A few years ago, it looks like that's the way. But the result is for Europe is it has been overtaken in all major technological advancement. There's very little, you see, most of the Amazons, the Microsoft, the big tech companies are in the US. Most of the new tech, solar, wind manufacturing is in China. Europe is nowhere. Why? Because the electricity is expensive. And as we've seen with Spain, is not as stable. So Europe, through their energy policies of decarbonization, are taking themselves out of the competitiveness in the global stage of emerging technologies. China, I've talked about, because of its energy policy directed its industrial strategies, they have taken over and now monopolizing some key elements of new technologies which are important for clean technologies and technology in general. I mean, beyond solar, almost all of Apple's cell phones are made in China. Part of it is through their high-tech manufacturing, but also energy. The US as well, one of the emerging technologies that is energy intensive, artificial intelligence, as we've indicated. artificial intelligence, some of the data centers operate like smelters in terms of energy consumption. Now, what is America doing to still continue to be in the lead of artificial intelligence? They're using natural gas. You may know that America is the leader of the production of oil and the production of gas in the world. And they've done so because they perfected fracking as a way of extracting oil and gas. And gas and oil in America is very cheap. Therefore, their power system is based on gas. And that gas is also now powering the new data centers. I mean, technical companies, the Microsoft and some of the AI companies are building campuses where the power system that it will go there is almost equal to maybe 4,000-5,000 gigawatts in one campus. So you could see what is their industrial strategy. AI is the industrial strategy. Technology is the industrial strategy. Therefore, the energy policy must follow that from availability and cost. So South Africa must, also must say, okay, in this whole world, in terms of technology, where do we want to play? If you're going to be beneficiary, in fact, what is said is that some of the minerals that goes into some of these new technologies, including data centers, solar panels, electric vehicles, are abundant in Africa and abundant in Southern Africa. I mean, one big example, cobalt is a key ingredient in the manufacturing of batteries. And 80% of the deposit in the world is in the DRC. And all of it gets mined, taken to China for processing. So the value add, is not residing in Southern Africa, it is residing somewhere. So South Africa, if you say we want to be a high tech, high level manufacturing, and which sectors we need to go into, then you're going to see what is the energy system. And in my view, cheap, abundant electricity for now, for South Africa, the option is to keep coal. Bring renewables as much as we can so that you can bring cleaner technologies, bring other technologies, but you're going to have to use coal like China is using as a bedrock of your energy strategy.
Is the idea that there are technologies for coal reliance that are able to exploit power out of coal in a environmentally safe way? Is that a myth, or is that actually something that is there and can be relied on in South Africa?
Yes. When you look at China again, some of the newer power stations are the most cleanest in terms of, air
Carbon emission.
air quality. Carbon emission is slightly more complicated.
Okay.
But it's the biggest issue is to clean up the air.
Yeah.
So that the air that people breathe does not, give them problem. So carbon does not necessarily from a breathing and all that. It just warms the planet.
Yeah.
Okay. So from a clean air perspective, China is far ahead in making newer, efficient, cleaner. All right. Now, the biggest step forward in terms of carbon emission is this thing about carbon capture and sequestration, where you actually capture the carbon and sequestrate. Is still the costs are still very high, but people like places like China and in some cases in the US are focusing on that so that they are able to use their fossil power base longer, and if need be, extract the carbon out of it to save the climate.
So let's actually make that much more basic. So what the Chinese are getting right, you say, is the air that we breathe. They are able to keep it clean.
Right.
And then there's the question of carbon emission.
Right.
Let's make it clear for us. What is the situation in South Africa and how do we get it right?
Well, the first thing, I think the first thing for South Africa, context is important. air quality is the most important. Making sure that our power stations are cleaner is very important. Is an immediate issue for people who live in areas where coal is being used.
Emalahleni.
Coal. So that is important. Climate is important, but you must have a context. We are probably less than 2% of the world CO2 emission. Okay? Whereas China is closer to the 40% in terms of their emissions. Now, you must understand that if you remove all coal consumption in South Africa, for the world, we are removing less than 2%. Now, but if you remove coal as a source for South Africa's energy system, you are removing 80% of the energy that South Africa has, and you are removing the cheapest source of energy. So I am saying accelerating removal of coal on the climate question, I think it's actually you sacrificing yourself for the world, but the world is not going to feel that it's sacrificed anyway. So clean air, absolutely. CO2, I think let's go as fast as we can. If we've got options, yes, but we don't have the options beyond coal.
And the deposits in South Africa of coal can run for almost over 2 centuries.
Absolutely.
Can't abandon that.
Yeah.
We don't abandon that. What are the actual other options that are sustainable that we should be investing in?
Okay. For South Africa, coal is almost like it dominates 80%. Nuclear is still small in South Africa, but we have nuclear. That is an advantage. Very few countries got nuclear because to set up a nuclear system, there's a lot of ecosystem that we must set up. So we've got that. In fact, just as an aside, South Africa was ahead of China when we did Quebec. But China now is a superpower in nuclear. So we have the capacity. So nuclear hydro is limited, but it's an option in the subcontinent. I mean, when you talk about DRC, the Inga can supply almost the rest of Africa.
Yes.
Mozambique has got a hydro. Integrating that into South Africa is another. Gas is another option. Now, the challenge with gas, we don't have our own deposit yet. We depend on Mozambique. And if we have to have a new gas system, we can use what is called liquefied natural gas. Now, the difference between natural gas and liquefied is the raw natural gas that comes out of the ground. Okay? This is the one that you actually burn in your power stations. But if you want to transport it long distances, you liquefy it. When you liquefy it, its volume is smaller. Then you can actually transport it. Then you can gasify it again. That's how gas is transported all over the world, from areas where they've got lots of natural gas to areas where they need it through. But when you do that, the cost is quite prohibitive. It is dollar-based, so you actually dollarize your energy system. So when the rand goes up and down, it's going to impact on your price of energy. That's the only disadvantage, but gas is an option. But for now, of course, renewables. Yes, there are areas in South Africa that have, outstanding solar radiation, outstanding wind. We must exploit it, but we must understand their limits in terms of how much they can actually take over the entire system and the cost associated with it. And the fact that when you've got wind and solar, you still have to have 100% backup. It's almost like when, with a car, when you buy a wind and solar power system, we've got a car, it doesn't mean you abandon your car. You're going to have two cars, because this one only works when the weather is, So with wind and solar, you need a backup, and that you're going to have to think about what that backup is going to be. Is it going to be gas? Is it going to be coal? Or is it going to be hydro? And those questions impact of the overall cost of the electricity, including the fact that with renewables, they happen where they happen. Then you must go there and bring in and actually put in wires to bring the electricity from where it's produced to where is required. And that also bring in cost.
That sounds like the thinking dominating within the electricity department at the moment. What's the future with you? If they were to request you back in Eskom, in the board, is it to contribute in this manner you are doing on the show? Is it something that is possible? What's your future?
No, I'm contributing. As I say, I mean, I advise, I consult, I have entities that are in the energy space across, I mean, including renewables. So, I mean, with the foundation, we did the energy Indaba here with a number of people bringing in experts to actually talk about the things that we're talking about. What is the future? So I am very active in the space. And of course, from time to time, I get called in. And if I get called in, I do contribute. I mean, I work with organizations like the Black Business Council from time to time. So yeah, I'm available and contributing in this space.
So you would, if given the opportunity, maybe chair the board of Eskom?
If that opportunity arises, of course.
Where is Bobby Godsell today?
I'd rather not. I don't know. I'd rather not.
When you look back,
yes,
do you think, I mean, this is retrospect,
yeah,
part of the big problems that defined Eskom in the past a decade and a half go back to the conflict between you and Bobby Godsell, and finally in 2025 you are vindicated?
Look, I don't want to make it personal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say these arguments, these problems, hypothetical Bobby, we call them Bobby, a certain view, a certain perspective you represented at the time, that he represented at the time. When you look back in 2025 with what now Eskom and the electricity policy or the energy policy attitude represented by the minister at the moment, and the way they are thinking about the future, are you in a position to say, Bobby, as a fellow South African, I think we can agree I'm vindicated?
Yeah. Let me put it this way. So what is in 2025, what is the overall lesson based on my experience in the energy system, and the lessons also carry over to the overall democratic project? And that's why I go back to, how did the young smarts think about state-owned enterprises? What was their project? Because their project was white empowerment, white industrial empowerment in the context of the politics of South Africa, and they orchestrated that. I am saying the orchestration of the industrial development of South Africa after 1994, it started well and it lost ground. And the confusion in the energy system that ended up with personality clashes between Maroga and Godsell was those were symptoms of that. Because if the center is clear, like you see in China, where the center is clear in terms of where China needs to be, you don't see personality clashes. And in fact, in China, you don't find personalities like the Microsoft personalities all you just see a China that's dominating spaces, right? So the lessons for me is clarity of purpose, courage, and intention to say the democratic project was to lift Black South Africans in particular, South Africans in general, from one level of development to the next. And how do we orchestrate that in a big way, unashamedly? Because at the moment we are what I could call we are still trapped in an apartheid prosperity model where the prosperity is for one section of our society while the others are managed to survive in the poverty. So unless we are deliberate to say, what is the industrial model, economic model that must lift all of South Africa to a different part of development, we're going to find ourselves fighting in this thing. That's why the issues about renewables comes into play, because we have not said, is this thing, this energy transition, a formula to lift South Africa in its totality to a different level of development? If you don't answer that, then we have not answered the question. So that's why I don't want to peg it to the issues of personalities. But sometimes when things happen, you must look at the silver lining. Is sometimes when you get through a challenge like I did in Eskom, it has led me to think through things. At some point to say, maybe they are right, but at some point to say, maybe there's something I need to contribute based on my insights that you gain when you sit down and say, what actually happened here? And what are the lessons I learned personally? But what are the lessons that I can impart in these conversations of how we take South Africa forward?
Dr. Maroga, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
That's it from us. Thank you so much for joining. This has been the African Renaissance Podcast. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
In essence, where is he now?
He's in the national conversation. What do you call it?
National dialogue.
Yeah.
I saw him there. But what is his role now?
No, I don't know, but I think
he's left the energy space.
He was never in the energy space. He comes from the mining space.
I know.
So, Pierre, OPA, because no. Yeah. And I give my cell phone as well. Okay.
We'll send you the
okay.
No, so that we can
much better. Oh yeah, I see. It's my test.
No, thank you so much. I still need maybe I'll get a Maverick to speak to the Sabotage.